Most athletes and martial artists usually gain their insane joint strength through mobility drills and locomotion patterns, adding more and more complexity to their movement patterns to hit their joints in different ways so they can become much stronger both in naturally occurring movements as well as movements that might compromise the joint, using those exact compromised positions to strengthen those joints even more. But that doesn't mean that you have to be a martial artist to use the same techniques. And what helped me the most when it comes to bulletproofing my joints is working through more natural movement patterns and increasing the complexity until my joints can go through all of the necessary patterns with ever increasing range of motion, exposing them to uncommon positions that will help them become stronger and increase the durability over time. So here are a handful of movement patterns that took my joints from being super fragile to basically bulletproof them. So if you're ready, let's go and have some fun. One of only 2 mobility drills I practice daily for their insane efficiency being the 90-90 deep squat switch, where we include massive amounts of ankle, knee and hip mobility and combine this movement with a lot of strength requirements for our hip flexors and our core to be able to go through this movement in an ever increasing range of motion, and even adding some forward fold as a small bonus at the very end of our movement pattern. With this exercise being highly scalable, and the thing that it does better than almost any other mobility drill you can do is putting rotational forces on our knee. And even though our knees are not rotational joints, at some point or another you will have those rotational forces putting pressure on your knee, and if you do not strengthen them in those positions, your chances of injuring them through something like this become exponentially higher. And once you have mastered its basics, reversing into a deep squat and switching to the other direction, adding some form of resistance will make this far more effective, not only when it comes to strengthening your joints, but also when it comes to strengthening your musculature, specifically your core and your hip flexors in conjunction with your adductors. And since this requires a little bit more mobility and a little bit more strength, let's break this down step by step. Objective number 1, lowering down with your feet flat on the floor into a deep squat position. If you cannot do that, elevating your heel will help you get far deeper into the squat position. First thing to start working on, internal hip rotation. Bring your knee down in front of your foot all the way and reverse. Over time, the more mobile you become through this ankle flexion as well as the rotation in your hips, you can remove this elevation and go through the same exact movement pattern, internal rotations. Then we need both the strength as well as some of the mobility to move into external rotation, and we can start by just bringing one knee down and pushing our hips forward, lengthening our hip flexors and our quads while activating our posterior chain, but most importantly reversing this move through strength and through flexing our hips, and then reversing into the other direction. And 2 steps in between that are gonna make this so much better is combining internal rotations by crossing over, now requiring a lot of strength in your tibialis and in your hip flexors and core. And then for those external rotations, just push both of those knees out as far as you can and move into this pseudo hip thrust, pushing forward, lengthening our anterior chain, then using our balance and core strength and hip flexor strength to reverse this movement and repeat once more. This will prime you for now combining some internal rotation with external rotation on one side, and then give you the strength you need to reverse this movement. When it comes to adding resistance, we can use the weight in the front, requiring a little bit more strength from our quads, or move it behind our back, now requiring a little bit more strength from our hip flexors as well as our glutes and adductors to reverse and switch directions. If you don't do any of the other drills, any of the other exercises, trust me, just please work on this one. You will see a world's difference in such a short amount of time, because it is one of the most effective drills you will ever do in your entire life.
Please like and subscribe, because my cat's lifestyle is not gonna pay for itself, and I wish I could tell you that they would be grateful, but that would be a lie. However, I am grateful enough for the 3 of us. So, thank you.
One of the most important skills as we age, sadly one that goes out the window far too early, is being able to switch from a seated position without the use of your hands into a standing position. The more different sitting positions you can use to get into your standing one, the better it's going to be for you. It doesn't matter if you're getting up with one leg or both legs. It is more important that you are able to get up at all. And one exercise that helped me work on this skill while strengthening my joints is exactly that. Both legs fully extended, just pull one in and now Now we're rolling over our knees once again with rotational forces, putting pressure on our knee, pushing our heel into complete ankle extension, and now lengthening our hip flexor on one side, our adductors and hip flexors on the other. Before we reverse, extend, and repeat once more. Pull in, roll over your knees, push your hips forward. We're strengthening our posterior chain. We're strengthening our anterior chain when it comes to our hips and the surrounding musculature. And of course, we should switch directions just so we do not end up fully imbalanced. And once you start adding resistance to this exercise, it will become exponentially more effective. So let's move to something less intense, but just as effective, requiring less strength and less mobility, but being very scalable, is the quadruped squat rock, shifting our body weight forward onto our arms and reversing it onto our legs once more. Now you can work with very closed legs. You can open up to work even more on your hips and your adductors. You can move as closely to the ground as possible and then reverse with a very long movement pattern to add even more flexibility and even more stretch while working a lot more on our core strength. Not to mention that we can shift directions by putting all the pressure on one leg or all the pressure on the other leg, now combining more unilateral movements, which are one of the best ways to work on your mobility because it is way more applicable to our normal life and our day-to-day life. Now, the duck walk is one of the staples in every martial arts mobility training for good reason. There are almost no other exercises that help you work on your knee, ankle, and hip mobility all in one single movement while adding this insane amount of flexibility and being so scalable. You can work with very short movements, low impact, and over time, when you get stronger and when you become more mobile, increasing your lunging movements to add a massive amount of anterior chain flexibility with a massive amount of strength for your hips and your glutes as well, and making this more strength dominant by adding some resistance. Once again, switching between having our weight at the very front to make it more quad dominant and less core dominant, or behind our back, so we have to add a little bit more balancing through core engagement. Absolutely amazing exercise, especially for people who want to increase their hip mobility range when it comes to, for instance, throwing high kicks. Bringing us to what is probably the most fun when it comes to all of those workouts. You can check out this video where we go through approximately 30 different animal movement patterns. What I enjoy the most is stringing those types of patterns together, starting with short lateral movement patterns, increasing their range of motion, switching directions, working more with my quads and my hips, rotations, and increasing flexibility for my posterior chain, increasing strength and coordination dominance for my quads and my hips by having to move backwards very low and very close to the ground, adding external hip rotation, internal hip rotation, combining as many different movements as I can think of. It doesn't have to be pretty, you don't have to be cat-like in your movements, you just have to go through them until you get used to executing them at will. And once you do, you will have the strength as well as the coordination and flexibility to adjust whatever movement pattern you are working on to give you the most benefit. Start with zero resistance, start with very short and tiny movement patterns, start with only 2 or 3 of those exercises, and over time increase your range of motion, add resistance, increase the amount of exercises, just like you would do with any other sort of progressive overload. Begin with 10 to 15 minutes twice a week, increase that to a third time. You will have a lot more benefit through increasing the frequency instead of increasing the volume and needing multiple days to recover in between. Captain Cairo, peace out.